Strong local self-government is the keystone to preserving human freedom. Let's talk for a minute about centralized power. Give me some situations. What does centralized power mean? Power gravitates to where? To where? Gravitates toward the center, or in our case, in our country, would be where? Gravitates toward Washington, right? Have you noticed this happening? We have seen heretofore, and we will see in this concept, where the founders only wanted a certain limited power given to the federal government. But as you know, nowadays, there's a lot of things happening in Washington that used to happen on the state and local level. But power has been gravitating to Washington, where they now tell you what? What kind of air you can breathe, what kind of food you can eat, what kind of business you can be in. I mean, a lot of this stuff is handled in Washington. Do you know this? They lay down the laws for air and food and so forth. Well, founders would say there's some results from this kind of thing. First of all, it removes decision-making from the people. If Washington is taking care of it, then what? We don't have to worry about it. They're just taking care of it, so don't bother me. Well, it also benumbs the spirit of voluntarism. You got a hurricane blowing across Florida, federal government will come in and help out. We here in our state, we don't have to worry about it. That's what happens when you think Big Brother's taking care of the problem. The local people will lose the will to solve their problems. In our valley here, we've been faced with some clean air, federal clean air violations recently. Have you noticed that? It's almost like saying, well, the federal government's going to solve the problem for us, and if somebody doesn't solve the problem, we're going to sue in the federal courts. See, this whole decision-making and the will to solve our own problems is kind of lost, okay? We're going to go buy a baby crib, but that's okay because the federal government has determined what kind of manufacturing rules should be with baby cribs to make them safe. We don't even have to think anymore because the federal government's put their stamp on it. So who thinks about that anymore? The government did it for us. So that's what we're talking about here. People seek anonymity of oblivion. What does that mean? You become part of the masses. And the masses are controlled, and they vote, and everything's decided in Washington, and few people become strong, independent individuals solving problems out in their own place. These are the problems with centralized power, and they control the money. Here's a great quote by Jefferson, where he talked about different levels from the nation to the farm. And the way to really preserve good and efficient government was to divide into these small manageable units. And this is what he said. You with me there on 238? He said, "The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to perform best." And then he starts listing them. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations. Do you see that? What should the national government be doing? Defense, foreign relations, and so forth. Know what he says? Then he says, the state governments with civil rights, laws, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally. See, that's the next level. Civil rights, does that surprise you? Now in our country, civil rights is a federal matter. Not so in the founders' view. Those should be local, state matters. Let's go on. He says, the counties with the local concern of the counties. What would a county be concerned with? What would be the best, what things would be best on a county level? About roads? You got to connect communities, right? So you'd go to the next highest level, that would be a county. You've heard of county roads, counties, perhaps schools even. Okay? He says, it is by dividing and subdividing these republics from the great national one down through all its subordinations. There's another level here after county. What would we put in there? He doesn't mention it here, but city. What would a city be concerned with? Utilities, making sure a good water supply is to every home. How about a sewage system? You know, as well as roads within and an orderly development of a city. Okay? Jefferson says, until it ends in the administration of every man's farm by himself. So what's the most basic level of government, he says? The family farm. Okay? By placing under every one what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. And then he asked the question, what has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has existed under the sun? And then he answers it, the generalizing and concentrating of all cares and powers into one body, no matter whether the autocrats of Russia or France or the aristocrats of a Venetian Senate. This has always been the way free government has disappeared. The centralization of power. Isn't that interesting? What an observation. I want you to turn now to page 239. Well, it's the next page. And this is what Madison says in the Federalist Papers. See if you can pick out the different levels that he's talking about. He says, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. You remember how few they were? Tell me. Congress has about 20 powers. The President has about 6 areas. And the federal courts have 11 kinds of cases. Very good. You learned those. And that's what he's talking about. Few and defined powers. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. What does that mean? That means if you go to the state constitution, guess what you won't find in there? A listing of powers, like you do in the federal. Federal is very clear, 26 and 11. State governments, they got so many powers, you couldn't list them all. If you did, you'd forget some. So you won't find it there. And he calls it numerous and indefinite. The former, meaning the federal, will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, which is what we've said. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. What do you think? Is that what he's saying? You see the division there? Okay. If the federal government would stay within the confines of the Constitution, it would be what in size? Relatively small. Amazing. He said, a few plain duties to be performed by a few servants. Incredible, isn't it? Well, we'll close with a quote here by John Fiske, a great historian back in the century of the founders. See if this prediction has come to pass. He says, if the day should ever arrive, which God forbid, when the people of the different parts of our country shall allow their local affairs to be administered by prefects sent from Washington, and when the self-government of the state shall have been so far lost as that of the departments of France, or even so closely limited as that of the counties of England, on that day the political career of the American people will have been robbed of its most interesting and valuable features, and the usefulness of this nation will be lamentably impaired. Does that come to pass? I think most of us would say, yeah. we've let this happen.